Our speaker this evening is, of course, Rob Whitacre. Rob was born in Illinois and raised in Texas, attending San Antonio College, Abilene Christian University, and Southwest School of Biblical Studies, as well as Southern Christian University in Alabama, which I believe was a predecessor of Amridge. Is that right? So attending a predecessor of Amridge. For over 20 years, he preached for congregations in Tennessee and Kentucky. In 2018, he started the house-to-house, heart-to-heart School of Evangelism. As director of that program, he trains dozens of congregations each year in how to grow in spirit and in number. The program has resulted directly in over 3,000 baptisms so far. Rob has also helped to produce a variety of written, audio, and video materials, all focused on Scripture and salvation. Rob's wife, Nicole, and his children, Hannah and Jared, are all actively involved in his work as well. Rob's topic this evening is Hark the Cry for Help. Come speak to us, Rob.
If you have a pen available, I want you to write down 4 numbers as we begin our session this evening. If you have a pen available, I need you to write down 4 numbers for me. And those 4 numbers are 2. Write down the number 2 somewhere on a piece of paper for me. And after you've written that number down, I want you to write down the number 0 somewhere on a piece of paper. And then the third number I need you to write down is a 6. Write down a 6 somewhere. And then the last number I need you to write down is the number 9. I need you to write down the number 9. So you've written down a 2, a 0, a 6, and a 9. So you might be asking, preacher, why am I writing down a 2, 0, and a 6, and a 9? Brethren, that is the year 2069. And if the losses in the churches of Christ we have sustained pre-COVID continue post-COVID, by the year 2069, it's going to be difficult finding a church of Christ in the United States of America. Recently, one of our Christian universities did a study to find out what we look like in the United States of America. I want to share with you some of the data because I believe it's important as we begin this lesson and this series this week that we become very real with the state of the church in America. What they found as we hark the cry for help is that our demographics don't look very well. They found out that 60% of our church members are over the age of 50. They found out that only 13% of our church members are under the age of 30. That means that 2/3 of our church members are gray-headed. Brother, we're looking at a church that's aging out. If you were a president of a country and your interior director came into your office and said, Mr. President, our nation is 2/3 over the age of 50, 13% under the age of 30, you would have a national crisis. You would have a dying nation. Brother, this is what the Church of Christ looks like in this country presently. But they went even further than that. So what they did is they went back in the numbers and they looked at the average rate of decline. They factored in the age, the demographics, and they came up with the following projection. Let me share it with you. They projected that in the year 2016, when the study was done, we had just roughly over 12,000 churches of Christ in the United States of America. They said, okay, if our projections hold true by the year 2019, we'll have just over 11,000 churches of Christ in the United States of America. And they said, if it holds true by the year 2022, we'll have over just 10,000 churches of Christ left in the United States of America. And they were spot on. And then they said, well, let's just take the numbers and taking into consideration that we're going to lose the baby boom generation in the next 25 years, which composed 2/3 of our church members. We're going to be looking at a church of Christ with just under 3,000 congregations left by the year 2049. Then they went into membership, and they said, well, let's look at what the membership of the Church of Christ is going to look like. Here it is. By the year 2016, when they did their study, roughly about 1.2 million members of the Lord's church. Then they said, okay, 2019, 1.1 million members of the Lord's church. 2022, about 1 million members left. Brethren, to the best of our ability to track it, that's about where we are today. I want to move the numbers forward. What's going to happen in the next 25 years? So let's take 25 years, the present demographics, the present trajectory, all things being equal. We're going to end up with about 275,000 church members left by the year 2049. Brethren, we are hemorrhaging church members. It's happening all over this nation. We're watching the Church of Christ disintegrate, congregations that is, in the United States of America. There could not be a greater need in our present state than to call churches of Christ back to their roots. Brethren, in Luke chapter 19, Jesus gave us the mission. He stated it succinctly. He said it where everyone can understand it. In verse number 10, Jesus said, the Son of Man comes to seek and save the lost. And if your mission tonight, if the mission of your congregation tonight is not the mission of Jesus Christ, I'm afraid you're not the Church of Christ. Because Jesus had one mission when he came. He stated it in Matthew, he stated it in Mark, he stated it in Luke, and he stated it in John. And let me restate it in case you don't remember it. Jesus said, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded. And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus said our mission is to teach and baptize. Brethren, I believe we have misunderstood that mission. At least when I look at churches of Christ, I've got to think, because I believe in the goodness of my brethren, we somehow are misunderstanding the mission. Jesus said, go ye. Brethren, do you know what the phrase go ye means? It doesn't mean go me. If you know anything about grammar, you know the word ye is plural, not singular. Let me make sure that we understand what that commission says. Go ye means go all. It means everyone in your church has got to go. It doesn't mean you got to go to Africa. It doesn't mean you got to go to Honduras. It doesn't mean you got to get on an airplane and go to India, because the Great Commission starts with your next door neighbor. I find it interesting that our churches are willing to spend tens of thousands, no, millions of dollars all around the world when we've got people that are lost in our communities and we have to have budget meetings about it. Brothers and sisters, we're not going to grow if we do not begin addressing evangelism at the local church level. And don't worry, if we don't do that, we're going to be calling India to send us their missionaries, because we won't be here any longer. Evangelism starts at your local church. I'm not opposed to foreign missions. I've been a part of them for as long as I can remember. I've directed them, I've led them, but I know this: if we don't wake our local brethren up to evangelize at home, if we don't evangelize, brethren, we're going to fossilize. And I cannot be more clear tonight that the need to herald this message and to cry this message to our churches, and especially to elders and preachers who seem to be very distracted today. I want to spend some time giving us some context this evening. I do want to preface my remarks, because before we leave these charts, I want to emphasize just one word. So I don't want you to feel as though you're inadequate, that these numbers are beyond reach. If you were a president in a country, I'd say you'd be hopeless. But we're in the Church of Christ, and your God has something to do with this. And brethren, you serve a God that's a victorious God. You serve a conquering God. You serve a winning God. But as I travel around this nation, and I travel to about 45 to 50 churches a year, I've already done 21. I sit with eldership after eldership, week after week. I just came from Michigan. I'm going to be in Cary, North Carolina Sunday, and I will sit with elders again. And let me tell you what I see on the faces of elders: defeat, tears, hopelessness. What in the world can we do to turn this around? My father served as an elder. My grandfather serves as an elder. And brethren, before God Almighty, this evening, some of my very best friends in this life are elders, and I love them. But a lot of our pulpits and elderships, they feel defeated. They don't know what to do. And in fact, if I've been coaching ball, before I did this full-time work, I coached at the high school level, I coached club ball, and I've coached at various sports. I've coached for public schools, private schools, home schools, and I can tell you this right now, that if my locker room had the culture of our churches, they'd fire me. In fact, you wouldn't put up with it at your football team. If the University of Tennessee or Alabama or Kentucky or Georgia had the culture that a lot of our churches have in them right now, you'd fire the whole staff. Our brethren wouldn't stand for it. They'd say, we can't have that. We can't have that outlook. Brethren, this is a projection. And projections are based on the status quo. That means if you keep doing what you're doing, this is exactly what's going to happen. But I have no plans. I have no plans for that to take place. It took a lot for me to sell my wife's dream home and remove us out of a full-time work. We baptized a third of the church. We were out in the middle of nowhere with 300 members, and I was buying my burial plots to ask my wife to leave her home and travel this nation and try to wake up churches. Because when I saw numbers like this, I said, not on my watch. But I want to be clear before we move any further, as we look at this projection, if we sit in our pews, if we continue doing what we've been doing, and we expect different results, if we don't change our culture, not our doctrine, our culture, if we don't address this, God will let you die. He didn't save the Israelites because they had the Ark of the Covenant. In the book of Judges, it's pretty clear. In the book of Joshua, he's pretty clear. God fights for you when you fight for him. Brethren, if we're not willing to fight, if we're not willing to make this the number one, in our school of evangelism, we have 221 churches enrolled right now. We have a 70% success rate, achieving 10% growth annually. 70% of our churches, and I can track them. I track every one. I am metric heavy. I have the numbers. I keep them every single week. And I can track the 30% and the 70%. And let me be clear as to why the 70% grow and the 30% don't. When you've got preachers and elders who are disengaged from the mission of the church, you won't grow, period. It starts with elders that are focused on it, preachers that push it, and I can tell you that 99% of the time, the members will follow. The members will follow. That's what they're designed to do. We cannot allow this to take place in our ranks. If this doesn't stir your spirit tonight, if this doesn't wake you out of the grave, you're already 6 foot under. There's nothing I can say tonight that will change you. This right here should be enough to get every child of God to look seriously at what we're doing. I need to tell you a story. When I started this school of evangelism, I had no idea what was going to happen. When Alan Webster and I met, and he said, you got to start a school, Rob. And I said, man, Alan, I'm a gospel preacher. He said, but you got to teach churches how to do what you guys have been doing. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I didn't really, he called it a trial balloon. He said, this balloon may pop, it may not go very high. But wow, it traveled. And the requests started coming in while my family started traveling. He said, Rob, you're taxing our resources. We got to hire more people. And it was exciting. Let me tell you how exciting it was. By the beginning of 2020, the beginning of the year, we were getting reports of 2 baptisms every single day. And those were from the churches enrolled in our school. I can tell you, I know exactly where I was when this happened. I was in Linville, North Carolina, and I just finished training a church. It was a Sunday morning. The elders asked me if I would stay over and preach that Sunday morning. I said I would. And I tell you what, the church was on fire. The preacher, during the invitation song, his name is Brother Kelly. Brother Kelly walks forward, and as soon as he hit the front of the pews, he collapsed. Tears were pouring out of his eyes. The elders came forward. They surrounded him, Kelly Brown. And I didn't know what was going on. I took my seat, and when the elders got into the pulpit, he explained the preacher is making confession. And his confession is that he has not emphasized evangelism as he should, and this is going to change. That preacher got in there, and he made a rousing just a fervent plea to the church that we've got to do this. I looked at my wife and I said, we're getting it. I said, the church is getting it. So I got in my car, and it was about March, and man, 2 baptisms a day. Remember that. We're in March. Remember, it's 2020, and we're heading home, and I get a phone call from my sister. And she says, Robbie, she says, where are you? And I said, well, Chrissy, I'm heading home. She said, Robbie, do you not know we're in pandemic? I said, pandemic? I said, Chrissy, I said, what do you mean? She started to explain. She said, Rob, right now I'm at the Sam's. She says, I'm in line. The line is literally wrapped around the building just to get meat. And I said, Chrissy, I'll be home as quickly as I can. She said, Rob, she said, do you have any toilet paper? Toilet paper? I said, well, honey, I looked at my wife. I said, honey, do we have any toilet paper? She said, I think a few rolls. She says, it's not enough. Stop and get all you can, Rob. And so I stopped at the local DG. I went into the DG. My wife wouldn't go. She was embarrassed. My children were laughing at me. I went in and I got the buggy and I grabbed it all. I went to the cash register and she looked at me and she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm buying toilet paper. And my wife took a picture of me as I was going out of the store. I still got it. I was embarrassed to show it. And in any case, who's laughing now? We just used the last roll a few months ago. It's okay, you know. So in any case, I get home and I got a phone call from the eldership of the Jacksonville Church of Christ and Alan Webster. And they said, hey, Rob, can you come? I'm just a member. And I said, well, brethren, I said, I'll be right there. And I walked in that elders conference room with those elders and Alan Webster, and they said, we don't know what to do. They said the media tells us that if we keep worshiping like this, there's going to be bodies piled in the streets, deaths in the millions, the funeral homes will be full, and we think we got to shut things down. And I looked at Alan, and I just shook my head, and I said, there's got to be another answer. I said, this is not possible. I said, I can't see this as being the solution. And we sat there for hours going through, you know, and it was probably the most painful meeting I've ever been in. And I don't Monday morning quarterback any eldership because that was uncharted territory. We didn't have a frame of reference, and it was painful. And I can remember going home and telling my wife and my children, you won't be going to worship on Sunday. I pray, God, I never have to say that again. And the elder said, y'all come up, small group, we'll video the worship service. And we did that for a month and a half, about 7 weeks. And I was in my office, and I was doing evangelism work like I normally would. And it just dawned on me as I was sitting there, something happened. Do you know how many baptisms were reported to me from the middle of March until the beginning of May? Just guess. Just guess how many churches reported baptisms? 0. I was getting 2 a day. I went from 2 every single day to 0 for 6 solid weeks. Brethren, when the Church of Christ turns out their light, when people need them the most, when people are going prematurely into judgment, they're unprepared to meet their God, where was the Church of Christ? I just looked at my wife and I said, I can't control what everybody else does, but I can control us. I said, not on our watch. I said, we're getting back out there. And so I called the next church on the calendar, and it was Covington Church of Christ. Wayne Dalrymple's one of the elders, and Brother Rogers is there. I mean, these are good brethren. I said, brethren, I'm coming. Brother Wayne says, Rob, we're not even open. I said, I know, but I'm coming anyway. I said, we've got to evangelize. And he said, Rob, I can't promise anybody to show up, but he says, I believe you're right. He said, we've got to reach people. And I got there, and 50 brethren filled that big auditorium, and we started. And from that day forward, my family, we trained 32 churches in 2020. I'm going to tell you what happened at the end. But I've got to talk to you about this family, right? Because I get back to Jacksonville. I went over to the GBN. I shot some videos. We were getting ready to go to Texas. I had 3 churches in Texas to go train, and I had a few weeks in between. So I called the elders. I said, is there anything you need? They said, yes, we're having a meeting. Can you come? I didn't like the last one. I said, but I'll come. So I sat there, and one of the elders looked at me, and he says, we're opening up. He says, we will never close our doors again. And by the way, Rob, the next activity we got is a vacation Bible school, and we're hosting it. And I looked at those elders, and I said, you'll be the only VBS in the nation. I'm all for it. And they said, we'll mitigate, we'll fumigate, whatever it is we need to do, we'll mask up, but we're going to teach the children the Word of God. Brethren, you ought to have seen the people come. And there were people there I hadn't even seen before. I didn't know who they were because we were the only church open in Jacksonville. That young man sits to the left of me, just behind the pews. And I looked over and I said, I don't know who that is. So I moved right in. I said, sir, he says, my name's Rob, and what's your name? And he had a son there. And I said, why'd you come, Nick? And Nick said, well, my son needs to know the Bible, and you're the only church that's open. I said, Nick, that's great. I said, is your wife with you? I said, what's her name? She said, well, her name's Darby, and she's not been. I said, Darby. I said, Nick, we've been sending compassion cards to Darby by the boatload. He says, yes, you have. He said, we really appreciate that. And I said, well, Nick, I said, can I meet your wife? He said, she wasn't feeling well tonight, but he said, I know she'd like to meet you. I said, I tell you what, Nick, there's one restaurant in Jacksonville that's open. I said, my treat. Who's going to say no to steak? Brethren, have you seen what they cost lately? And I said, brethren, he said, I'm there, Rob. So we met at the steakhouse. And we're just talking, and I have 3 questions that I commonly ask people when I meet them. And if the church has done their job, and Jacksonville had. First question is this. I said, what do you think about the Jacksonville Church of Christ? Nick, he said, I like it. He said, man, they're great people, nice. The VBS, all the cards they've sent me, and wow, they've been praying for my wife. I said, well, Nick, do you know much about the Jacksonville Church of Christ? He said, I don't know a lot about you. I said, would you like to know more? He said, I sure would. I said, I just so happen to have these little booklets. I always have the booklets because I have one mission. And I said, Nick, would you be okay? Maybe we sat down and maybe we could have another meal and we would just run through these little Bible study. He said, well, I can enjoy that. And I said, well, wonderful. So we get in this little room like this, and I said, at a time when Christians are not evangelizing, maybe it would be good to give an example of Christians that can evangelize. And for no other reason than trying to encourage my brethren, I took a photo. I said, this is what a Bible study looks like in COVID. And so we did our study. I guess it wouldn't surprise you what happened. Brethren, did you know 90% of the time, if you sit down with someone who's willing to do a Bible study, they will obey the gospel 90% of the time? I don't know why we're afraid. I don't know what we're running from. And I don't know where this idea came from that evangelism doesn't work in the United States of America. Well, I know exactly where it came from. And we would do well not to listen to him ever again. We would do very well to listen to the one who knows, that is Jesus, the conquering, triumphant Savior, because you can convert people even in times of difficulty. What I want to do tonight is make this lesson very practical, so I'd encourage you to take notes. I'm going to give you our 6 steps to success. These are the 6 things we teach churches when they enroll in our school. 6 things you've got to do if you're going to grow and you're going to evangelize. Number 1, you need contacts. There isn't a business in the world who doesn't understand this model. Walmart understands this model. The Navy understands this model. Even the NFL understands the model. And if you don't understand the model, you can go woke and go broke. It's okay. If you offend all your customers, if you drive them off, you don't have a business. What happens if the Church of Christ doesn't have contacts? Brethren, we don't make it. And churches call us all the time. I field phone calls every day, emails and texts. And the number 1 question I get from churches, this is it. They said, Rob, evangelism isn't working. We cannot find an answer. What can we do? It's always similar. Sometimes it takes 30 minutes for the question to get out. But I'm a patient listener, because I always have one question to ask. It doesn't matter what you tell me, and I'll listen tonight. If you got a story, I'll listen. But I'm going to tell you, when I'm done listening, I will ask my question. And the question is, how many contacts do you have? That's the question. I want to know how many contacts you have. And do you know what the answer I get from most churches? 0, 1, 2, 3. Take your Bibles and let's go to Matthew 22 together. And I want to share with you how Jesus taught us contact. I want to share something with you, because I've read Matthew 22 for a long time, and I can tell you that I never looked at this passage like I do today. When I was growing up, I didn't see this passage in the same light I see in it today. Let me give you a little bit of context. This is the parable of the wedding feast. And in this parable, Jesus is going to conclude something, but before he gets there, he's going to set it up. So let me set it up for you. Let's go to verse number 3. And he sent forth his servants. Let's just stop right there. If you want contacts, the number one thing you got to do is become a sending church. You send them to New Zealand, and we don't even bat an eyelash, and we write out the check for $10,000. We send them to India. We send them to Honduras. I'm asking you to send them to Florence, Alabama. And don't tell me that we're all Christians and can't evangelize. Recently, the Hatton Church of Christ enrolled in our school. Go ask Chris Miller what happens when a church adopts the model. You can grow in Florence. And that doesn't mean you steal church members from every other church. It means you evangelize those who are lost. It means you help convert people, brethren. And you can do it in the Muscle Shoals area. You can do it in Florence, Alabama. You've got to become a sending church in your community. And I want you to listen to Jesus. Jesus said he sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. You're not the first people who came across a stubborn culture. Don't tell, well, the culture's just more difficult than during the time of Christ. I don't buy that for a minute. They wouldn't come. But he's giving us a principle. You got to send. So the first thing we got to do is get people out. We know we're going to get a resistance. We know that. Let's go to verse number 4. And he sent. I'd circle the word sent. I keep circling this word because he keeps using it. He's a sending God. But there's something else that you need to look at. Not only is he a sending God, he's a summoning God. He summons people. We don't just send them out there without a mission. The mission is a summon. So he says, bid them. Go out there and bid them, invite them. Go out there and find people. And when you meet them, you tell them to come. He's a summoning God. Now, I don't have time to go over this entire pericope, so I want you to go down here to verse number 9. I just got a few words I need you to look at. I get my pen ready. Here it is. Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many. It was my Bible. I'd take a red ink pen and circle that. I would star it, I would circle it. Brethren, I would highlight it because there's a reason behind this verbiage. He said, as many as ye shall find, bid them, summon them. But I want you to look at the word many. Now I want you to go down to verse number 10. And in fact, we'll just keep going down here. Verse 10, so these servants went into the highways, they gathered together all, and as many, circle the word again. Now, if you were 5 years old, I tell you not to do it, but you're not 5, so I'm going to ask you to draw in your Bible. And I want you to take the word many in verse number 9 and connect it to the word many in verse number 10. And I want you to see that Jesus is taking you somewhere. And let's go here. And as many as they found, both good and bad. Who are we supposed to be bidding? The good and the bad. Who are we supposed to summon? The good and the bad. What if they don't look like you? You summon them. What if they don't talk like you? You summon them. What if they don't have your morals? You summon them. You summon the good and the bad. You better learn to plant and stop picking. Now, I want you to look at verse number 10. He said, and as many as they found both good and bad, you bid them. Man, I'm going to run out of time. Go down to verse 14. Let's just get to this summary. He's also a summarizing God. God understands math better than any business out here. He understands math. And I'll tell you what, do you know why some of these businesses are so successful? Because they have followed Christ and his model. And I'll show you where it's at. For as many, look at verse 14. If you were to take that word many and you were to leave Matthew 22, where would you go? Many. Where do you find that? Matthew 7. Let's go to Matthew 7. Let's look at it. So Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, wide is the gate, broad is the way that, and many. I want you to notice it. Many there be that go in thereat. So stay right there. Go back to Matthew 22, and let's take the thought forward. For as many as are called, he's a calling God. You got to get out there and so if you get out there and call them, if you get out there and invite them, what's going to happen? For as many are called, Few are chosen. Brethren, if I had the literary license, and I don't, but if I had it tonight and I could rewrite the Bible, and I wouldn't, this is how I would write Matthew 22:14. I would say this. I'd say, for few are called and none are chosen, and that's the church of Christ. You tell me that's not our churches. You tell me that's not what we do. We go out there and call a few of them. We go out there and we look for just a few. We never go after the many. That makes us uncomfortable. But we're going. You know why we end up with nothing at the end of the year? Because we're not following the model. The model says go out to the many. For as many are called and few are chosen. Narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that find it. So what I did is I based this entire model on the concept of getting to the many. If you don't get to the many, your church will die. How do you do that? You say, Rob, we're not Walmart. Do you know Walmart's number one advertising tool? Do you know who their number one advertising tool is? I'm looking at them. There are the ladies, and they understand what that little yellow circle says in the clearance aisle. You ought to see my wife when she sees the clearance aisle. Her phone, it lights up. Every woman on the contact list is going to hear from her. Christmas is 70% off. Hurry and get here now. Do you know who the best contact creators are in your local church? You are. Walmart doesn't have to advertise. I ask my wife, how do you know if honey, how do you know if the Christmas is 70% off, 90% off? Well, she'll get a little text from one of her friends. Nicole, Christmas is 90% off. Every woman out there is going to the Christmas aisle because it's 90% off. It's called word of mouth. Do you know who the best contact creators are in the church? You are. Let me make a suggestion. I got this from Larry Acuff. Brother Acuff is an old soul winner. I love him. And I've learned so much from our brethren over the years, and I will not let it die. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. Brother, here it is. You want to get contacts in your local church? You grab a bookmark, and we have them in our school, and you pass one out to every single member in your pews, and after the sermon is done, you get an elder in that pulpit, and you say, brethren, we've got something we need your help to do. I want you to write down 10 people you know that are not members of the Church of Christ, and if you want them to go to heaven, write their name down. How many of you in the audience tonight, I want to know how many of you, I want you to raise your hand if you're able. How many of you tonight know 10 people that are lost? Does anybody, if you don't, get out your cell phone and look in your contact list. I promise there are 10 there. By the way, Brother Kirk, do you know who the worst contact creator is in the Church of Christ? The preacher. You know why? Because the preacher does not know the lost. He knows the saved. He goes to the hospital with the saved. He goes to the funeral home with the saved. He goes to the church services with the saved. He sits in the office with the saved. And if we don't engage our church members, we will not achieve victory. It's step one. And if you don't start this process out right, you won't finish right. There's no need for me to go any further. If we can't build a healthy contact base, we're done. If Walmart has all the products in the world in a warehouse full of them, what good does it do if there's no customers? What good does it do to have an endless flow of cash into the military system, to have every jet fighter and weapon system out there when we can't fill the airplanes? Because no one wants to sign up, and I don't blame them. Contacts. It's universal. Walmart understands the language. Believe you me, Bed Bath & Beyond understands, and that's why they're about to close their doors. Tick off half your customers, and you'll find out. What we need to do is go out there and not tick everybody off. We need to go out there and just invite them. We need to go out there and love them. We need to go out there and show them what Christians are all about, because I really believe if people knew the generosity and the kindness and the love that's in the Church of Christ, we would fill up our buildings. Why don't we cut holes into the walls of our churches and let people peep in a little bit and see the kind of people we are? I could spend an entire lesson on point number one, but I got to keep going. Point number two, We need a prospect list. A prospect is not a contact. A contact is an inactive prospect. A contact's just a name. When a visitor walks in your doors, is that a contact? No, not until you get their name. You know how many times my family has walked into churches on a Sunday night unsuspectingly, and then we walk out and no one even asks our name? Boy, I could start listing them. I could list the churches for you. And you say, well, we got contacts. They're called visitors. No, you don't. If you don't have a first name, a last name, and an address, you have no contact. You know what we do in the Church of Christ? Here's what we do. Would you get out the card from the pew back in front of you and fill that visitor card out so we can get a record of your presence? Brethren, I don't know if you realize this or not. They're not going to fill it out. The members don't even fill it out, much less the visitors. We have a whole plan of how to solve that problem, by the way. But let's just go to a prospect. A prospect is an activated contact. So that's what I call my target list. You will never hit a target you don't aim at. And if you don't aim at it, you're not bringing every hunter that brings home the big buck aimed at the big buck. It's not an accident. I don't know if I've ever been to a Church of Christ that didn't have a prayer list. And when I was a preacher, I preached for 21 years full time, and I can tell you that that prayer list was important. And man, we had a long list of them. I have yet to meet a church where I just come in randomly that has a prospect list. You know what a prospect? It's a target list. Those are the lost. These are the people we're trying to reach. These are the people that we're activating. We're not going to do it one-on-one. We're going to do it congregationally. We're not going to try to win them over just with one person. We're going to win them over with the entire Church of Christ. Brethren, we're going to love them like they've never been loved before. And it will take a congregational plan to do it. It is incredible what happens when you put that much love on somebody. A farmer understands this. He takes the soil contacts, he fertilizes the soil prospects, and he plants the seed, step 3. Businesses understand this. I promise you, you're in sales, you get it. When a vacuum cleaner salesman knocks on your door, the last thing he asks you to do is buy a vacuum. If he ever wants to sell one, don't ask. Because if he doesn't have a relationship with you, you're not buying. We have got to develop relationships with people. We've got to give them gifts, show them you're genuine, show them you care. Never go to the door empty-handed. There are just some basic rules of thumb that we should use when we're trying to prospect contacts. You should have a massive compassion card ministry in your church. You ought to be sending hundreds of cards a week. I didn't say 10, I said hundreds of cards a week to the sinners, not to the brethren. Brother Kirk doesn't need a card. He's going to come to church regardless if you send him a card or not. Do you know who needs cards? Your neighbor that's got cancer, that's lost. Do you know who needs cards? That lady you work with that maybe she's just had a baby and had some problems. Maybe someone else you're working with have lost a loved one. You gotta love people. Do you know what it says in the 22nd verse of Jude? It says, "On some have compassion, making a difference." We have got to love people. Amen. And if we don't show that love, you'll never get to step 3. You got to have a Bible study. Now, not everybody in the church has to have a Bible study. In fact, what we find is if you get 10% of your church that's able to do a Bible study, the model's going to work. Because most of the work is actually done in steps 1 and 2. And I need everybody in steps 1 and 2. But I need a core group that's capable to do a study. So we got to train the church. We got to equip the church. You know, our churches are full of equipment. Coffee pots, coffee stirrers, coffee creamer, coffee grinds, coffee cups, coffee makers, sinks and kitchens and silverware, spoons, knives and forks and napkins, and we've got tablecloths and we got salt and pepper and sugar. We got everything we need to open a soup kitchen. Where is your evangelism material? You know where it's normally located? In the preacher's office. Locked in the library, the second most unused room in the building. You know what the most unused room is, don't you? Brother Wendell Winkler once said the most unused room in the church building is the most important room. It's the baptistry. Second to it is the library. We need to equip the saints. We need to make sure that our church members are trained. We need to make sure that our members have the tools to do the job. The farmer does not buy land, prepare the land to let it sit there. He plants the seed. Jesus said, "Go ye therefore, teach and baptize." You show me a church that's baptizing, and I'll show you a church that's teaching. And you show me a church that's not baptizing, and I promise you they're not doing Bible studies. How do you get baptisms? You study the Bible. It's 9 out of 10. Now I'm going to give you some metrics tonight. I'm going to give you some numbers. You know what the rate of loss is from contacts to prospects? So if you got a church of 100 people and each one of them is responsible for giving you 10 contacts, that's 1,000 contacts. Write these numbers down because I track them carefully. Here they are. You're going to have 1,000 contacts. How many of those are you going to be able to prospect in 1 year? It's impossible to prospect 1,000 because you're developing personal relationships, but you can do 100. You're going to have a 90% drop off. You may want to write this down. You want to learn how to get baptisms? I'm going to give you the numbers. You're going to go from prospect to Bible study. You know what your rate of loss is? It's 90% again. Many are called. Now let's go back to Matthew 22 and understand what Jesus said. Jesus said, you're going to go out to the many, but when you're out there with the many, guess what you're going to find? The few. He didn't say go call many and you'll have many baptisms. He said you call many and you get a few baptisms. So let's do this again. You lose 90 from contacts to prospects. That's now 100. You lose 90% again. You're down to 10. You do 10 Bible studies. Guess how many baptisms you have? 9. How many of us would be satisfied if we baptized 9 in our local church in a year? If you had 100 members and you baptized 9 every year, or 10% every year, on the 7th year, those of you who like numbers, what have you done to the church? It's called the rule of 7. Anybody know what that means? You doubled. You say, Rob, that's impossible. If you gave me 20 minutes tonight, I'd show you 70% of the congregations where we've taught that are doing it and doing it every year. We've got churches in our school right now that have doubled in 3 years. And they're all over the country. Inner cities, I'm talking coastal cities, I'm talking rural, urban, and suburban, because they understand the model. You have got to go out to the people, you've got to prospect them, you've got to do studies, and that's how you get baptism. It's not a secret. Jesus said, many are called. You want more baptisms? Guess where you need to start? Contacts. So why don't we increase the contacts from 1,000, and why don't we jump that number up a little bit? Why don't we look at visitors, new movers? Why don't we look at contacts from house to house, heart to heart? Why don't we look at contacts from, referrals, word of mouth? Why don't we look at contacts from benevolence? And why don't we use our benevolence work to evangelize? Because that's how you get new converts. And when you get new converts, that's how you get a growing church. If we want our churches to grow, we need to establish a model in our churches that's successful. Ford Motor Company operates on a model. Every successful business out there has a model. In our churches, we're shooting from the hip, and I'm afraid our model is build it and they will come. Brethren, they're not coming. They are not coming to our churches. We're going to have to go out and get them. Build it and they will come only works in the movies. It does not work in churches of Christ. Making our churches look like the local community church is not church growth. This is church growth. This comes right out of the life of Christ, right out of the book of Acts. The average Church of Christ member has heard 4,000 sermons, sung 20,000 songs, participated in 8,000 public prayers, and converted 0 people to Christ. And then we ask the question why we're dying. Why aren't we growing? Because that's where we're at. If time would allow me tonight, I'd run you through these very thoroughly. I cannot. But I'll give you 7 things real quick your church can do. Number 1, you can teach your church members how to conduct a personal Bible study. Equip them with the study method and have your preacher on a Sunday morning, not a Monday night. I'm talking about during the worship setting. If you cannot preach back to the Bible during worship, if your preacher won't preach back to the Bible during a worship setting, you have a serious problem. I've met just a few who wouldn't. When eldership called me, in fact, they sat down with me and they said, Rob, our preacher won't preach back to the Bible and we don't know what to do. And I said, I do. Number 2, we need to understand that in today's world, there are some people who are just not going to work with you personally. I mean, they're scared to death. Or maybe time. They're working 12, 15-hour days, but they would do a Zoom study. So in our school, we developed a Zoom virtual study. We have conversions almost on a weekly basis using this. I wish I could tell you the story, how we developed it. It was during COVID. Very safe. Number 3, a digital study. So now it's not virtual. It's just kind of one-sided, but we'll do the study. We'll do the study digitally. In other words, they put a camera in front of World Video Bible School put a camera like 5 inches from my face, and they said, convert the camera. That's what they told me to do. So I did my very best, and at the end, Matt Kane looked out at me and said, Rob, the camera wants to be baptized, but we don't lit it because it costs too much money. And so I said, okay. So you can do group studies. Group studies are very, very, you got to be very careful how you do these. And if I had more time, I'd go into detail, but just let me give you one quick rule. You don't do a salvation study in a group study. You do general studies and you peel away the people who are interested because the problem one person has becomes the problem everybody has. And you lose control of the group. So that takes a little bit of skill there. Number 5, you can use correspondence. I don't know why during COVID, every Church of Christ didn't take those old let me think about it. Moses and the 10 Commandments. I'm thinking of the author's name. It'll come to me. Those old correspondence courses, John Hurt. They've been sitting around our church buildings for 30 years. Why didn't we take them and mail them to every address in the phone book? And why didn't we take the new ones by Alan Webster and mail them to everybody that we know? Brethren, why didn't we evangelize during COVID? Never again. We can take books like Muscle and a Shovel, Conform, Reborn, and Transform, and give them away. We can take tracts, and I know that tracts have a very limited success rate. I get that. But like Bobby Bates used to say, my little bit of something's better than your whole lot of nothing. So I choose this over nothing, because at least I know that we'll get something. As I close, I got one more story to tell you. We came back in the end of 2020. We had 32 churches, and it was going well. The baptism started up again, and every time I called the church, I realized there was an opportunity for an elder to tell me no. I had one church tell me no, just one. And by the way, that elder was at a basketball game, and he said it was too dangerous for me to come. When I finished the phone call, I said, thank God you're able to watch your grandson play basketball. We got back, and as we were driving home, and I think it was from Texas, I got a phone call from one of the associate preachers, Alan, and an associate preacher, Cade Summer. He says, "Hey, Rob, we got a call from a lady, and she says that she's been locked away in her apartment for about 4 or 5 months, and she said, Rob, she told us if she doesn't get out of that apartment, she's going to die." And they said, so she wants to come to church, and she got house to house, heart to heart, and she'd like to come. I said, sounds great. I said, Kate, remember the principles. Don't answer questions. If you want to know more, you'll just have to ask me afterwards, but you don't answer questions. And so anyway, so he picks her up, takes her to church. She loved it. She was overwhelmed by the hospitality of the church. On the way home, Kate calls me and says, hey, Rob, she loved it. And she wants to come back. I said, Kate, that is wonderful. I tell you what, Nicole and I are back in town. We'll pick her up. By the way, brethren, when I put you on my contact list, you're already baptized. It's just a matter of time. I am relentless. And so when we picked her up, we took her to church, and we're talking to her, getting to know her. She said, I've been locked in this apartment for about 5 or 6 months, Rob. And I said, yeah, Tony, it's been kind of tough. She said, Rob, I'm going to die if I stay in this apartment. But my children say I'm going to die if I get out of the apartment. I'd rather die at church. I said, sounds good, Tony, And we actually took her to get a bite to eat and got to know her. And I remember taking her over to the Cracker Barrel, and we were eating together, and I said, Tony, what's going on this week? And she said, well, it's my birthday. I said, well, congratulations. She says, no, it's not. She said, no one will celebrate. My family thinks I'm nuts getting out of my house. I said, well, Tony, we'll celebrate. You would? I said, yeah, what's your favorite restaurant? She said, I love the Red Lobster. I said, well, they're open. I said, why don't we go to Red Lobster? I'll grab some friends and we'll just get together and visit. And she said, oh, I'd love that. So I called one of our new converts. Her name's Kim Bullock. I said, Kim, I need your help to convert Tony Adams. She says, what do you need me to do? I said, just call her. She says, what do you need me to say? I said, just be Kim. Kim, it's hard to get off the phone with Kim, and that's what Tony needs. And I said, what do I say? I said, it comes naturally, Kim. Just talk to Tony. And so sure enough, we took Kim. We're building our relationship. And again, we're sitting with Tony, and it's her birthday. And the church is flooding her with gifts. People are bringing things to her apartment. And I'm talking to Tony. I said, Tony, what do you think about the Jacksonville Church of Christ? She said, oh, I love it. Of course she does. I never ask questions I don't know the answers to. Brethren, I would not have asked that question if she just walked into the church building. I ask that question when you do your job. And by the way, church, when you do your job, I'll do mine. And I can't do my job without you. You've got to prospect the contact. And the Jacksonville church was doing that. And so I said, Tony, do you know a lot about the Jacksonville? Well, not a lot. I said, would you like to know more? Oh, I sure do. Rob, we could come over to the apartment right now. So, of course, I just so happen to have these little booklets. I always have the booklets. And I said, Tony, that sounds really good. We got over there, and I don't know what it is about older ladies. They always have the TV trays. We got them out of the closet. We have no table, of course. And Nicole had a TV tray. And where are you at, Nicole? There it is. And I had a TV tray, and Tony had a TV tray. We started our study. And I mean, she loved it. We came back for study 2, and she loved it. And I know where this is going. And we got to study 3, and I said, oh, by the way, Tony, I said, tell me a little bit more. You told me you were, where is it that you attended? She said, well, I grew up in the Salvation Army. That was new to me. She didn't tell me that last time. I said, well, Tony, were you saved in the Salvation? Oh, yeah, they sprinkled me. She said, that was my church. By the way, it is a church, brethren. I said, well, Tony, you told me you were a Jehovah's Witness. Well, I have been lately. She said, but they're closed. Good. Keep them closed. I want every church that doesn't teach the truth to close their doors. But brethren, upon my word tonight, every church of Christ needs to keep their doors open. I said, Tony, can we just keep doing the study? She said, sure. We got to Acts 8, 35 through 39, and her eyes filled with tears, and she just cried. She's got it. I never tell people what to do, by the way. That's not what evangelists do. We just show them. People are smart enough to figure it out. And I looked at Tony. I said, Tony, are you okay? No, Rob, I'm not. I said, what's wrong, Tony? She said, Rob, I was sprinkled. And I said, well, I know. But Rob, you're supposed to go down into the water. And I said, you are. But Rob, I'm scared of the water. I said, well, Tony, good news. She said, what's that? I said, I've been baptizing people for the last 25 years. I've never lost one yet. And she looked at me and she just laughed. Oh, Rob. And I said, I'll tell you what, Tony, if I called Kate Summers and one was on one side and one was on the other, would that be? She said, yeah, I need to do it. We went over to the Jacksonville church, and there's Kate on the left side. I'm on the other side. And I said, now, Tony, we're going to hold your breath. It'll be very quick. I said, remember, close your mouth when you go under. She said, okay, Rob. I said, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We went down. As soon as she went under the water, she opened her mouth. She came up coughing. She couldn't talk for about 30 seconds. I was patting her pretty good on the backside. She looked up at me. She said, Rob, you tried to kill me. And I hugged her. Brethren, what happens when you evangelize? I want to show you something. In our school in 2020, that's COVID. We had 370 baptisms, 32 churches. In 2021, we increased that to 649 baptisms. That's about 50 churches. In 2022, we got that to 980 baptisms, and of today, we're 35% higher than we were last year. Brethren, if you can learn how to evangelize and get the church doing her job, congregational evangelism, your church will grow. Your God guarantees it. I've yet to find a church that pours their resources into local evangelism and learns how to do it and has preachers that are pushing it, elders that are leading it, that doesn't grow. I'm still waiting for that church. Brother Wendell Winkler once said, "Brethren, if we don't arise and baptize and evangelize, we're going to fossilize." And I believe those words are as true today as they were when he spoke them 30 years ago. May God help us to train our churches to evangelize. Thank you for being here.